After waiting outside the town gates for a while, Ark gets led inside where he meets the village leaders who also happen to be Ariane's parents. She's already told them about the skeleton stuff, and they're fine with him being a human, too. Okay, so let me get this straight. Up until this point, it was fine for Ark to have to hide his body, and to have elves be irrationally racist, but the moment either of those things would create meaningful tension, Ariane just smooths things over. Regardless, Ariane and her dad go to a big meeting of the Elven Elders, where they talk about what to do moving forward. They bring up the slave trade, the broken treaty, and that Ariane attacked the house of a noble. No decisive conclusion is reached, and so Ariane and her dad start to head home. They talk about whether or not it was right for her to risk a war by attacking a noble's estate to save some kids. Her father assures her that what she did was right. Ariane learns that her older sister, Even, got married, which surprises her since Even apparently cares about nothing but fighting and said she'd never get married. The two sisters meet and catch up, and Even tells Ariane she's proud of her before teasing Ariane about probably having a crush on someone. Ooh. Ariane's mom shows Ark around town where he meets some of the kids he saved, which was a nice touch. Then, the mom asks him to spar. The mom actually kind of kicks his ass. The point of the scene is that even if Ark has all of these fancy powers, he's not nearly as skilled as some others. It's a refreshing thing to see in a power fantasy isekai. The mom leads Ark to a bath where he can relax. Ariane walks in on him. Anime ensues. The four of them talk at dinner about Ark continuing to help the elves. As payment for his help, the father offers information about a curse-breaking spring near where a powerful dragon lord lives that might help break his curse, like the skeleton stuff. Ark, that night, tries using his own curse-breaking magic to try and undo his curse, only to find that he was able to regrow some of the flesh on his body. End of episode. Alright, that episode was kind of decent. Like, it's not great or anything, but by this show's standards, it's more than a pleasant surprise. There are a lot of things that I liked. Ark interacting with his curse is a pretty interesting dynamic and makes me wonder where things are going from here. Ariane has a lot of fun, heartfelt moments with her family that made me like her more. And Ark actually is going through some conflict as part of a training arc. Mind you, none of this really adds any reason to watch the show if you didn't have one already, but it does do its job without adding anything egregious. What's cool is that this gives me an opportunity to shift my focus a bit. Instead of hating on the show, I want to take a moment to talk about how the show can start doing itself right, because now we have some stuff to work with. I think there are 4 things that, if it did them, would make this a decent enough show to not really be worth talking about on this channel. The first is for Ark's future successes to come as a result of aid he's received from other people. For example, him using what he learned from the mom to best his next foe. That way the author can stick with the power fantasy while still having Ark grow and giving a sense of conflict and resolution. Part of me wants to suggest he should lose some important fights to drive him to improve, but I'm gonna make the decision to not dunk on this show for being in the genre it's in. There are better and worse ways to do a power fantasy, even if I'm not the biggest fan of them. The second is for this elf town to, at some point in the near future, get attacked as a major plot point. Ark, as things are, mostly saves people he hadn't known before saving them. It created a certain relationship between him and the world where he was a mysterious hero, but that has its limitations. As things are, this location is full of people important to both Ark and Ariane in the form of her parents and the elves they had previously saved. Ark even told them he'd come to their aid the next time they were in trouble. If this happened, it allowed for a sense of real tension and escalation without having to put Ark on the back foot, and it generates some actual pathos by leveraging the more superficial but sweet moments we had in the past. On that note, a third thing we need is for Ark to slowly grow more heroic in his internal monologue. His relationship with the world around him does not currently reflect his true inner self, but this gives him a good opportunity to become the mask. We don't need to break the fantasy by giving him consequences for his personality flaws. We can just have him grow and let that stand on its own. There's escalation and change, and it'd be satisfying and heartfelt. The fourth and final thing we really need is a better handling of his dynamic with Ariane. Right now they have little bonding them together beside the fact that they both want to help people. Now this could work on its own if both of them mostly knew selfish people who wouldn't help, but that's not the case. They need something else on top of that. The thing I suggested about her secretly being a loser could work, but really anything if it's interesting and heartfelt enough. There's a problem, though. See, as I mentioned earlier, I'm avoiding insulting this show for being a power fantasy, and that's because I feel it's not valid criticism. See, a power fantasy is characterized by a unique relationship between the protagonist and the conflicts of the story. It skips the part where the conflict challenges them, instead choosing to explore the part where they triumph in more detail. This gets rid of one of the core things that makes dramatic storytelling work, and you could see that as a mistake. But I see it as an interesting problem to solve. Doing something unorthodox and innovating to make it work is one of the coolest things to do as a writer. So the author has to get creative, do things that makes up for the weaknesses of power fantasies, and he does some. For example, the reason there are so many scenes dedicated to making the villains hateable is because that builds tension without having to challenge the protagonist. However, not much else was done. Whatever tricks he does do, it doesn't go the distance. But my suggestions wouldn't have done that much either. See, Skeleton Knight's power fantasy is holding it back. All of the obvious ideas to improve it would have required me to break that fantasy. The reason for this isn't because power fantasies are bad, it's because the story set itself up for failure. Power fantasies are, in no small part, about the relationship between the protagonist and the conflict, but there isn't much going on between Arc and the villains. Arc just doesn't have much to do in fights. He doesn't have much banter with the enemies, he doesn't muster intense emotions when fighting them, he doesn't do anything that interesting or creative in fights. The villains aren't foils to him, nor do they represent any part of his psyche or backstory or anything like that. That's why the climax of the slave trade arc only took 3 minutes, because there's nothing for Arc to do but show up and win. He's not the right protagonist for this story. If you want to see me tear apart episode 7, then like and subscribe with notifications on, and if you want to support me, you can check out my Patreon, the link is in the description.